Okay, well, we mentioned Deming at the top of the show, and a big part of what Deming taught was the use of statistics to understand and ultimately control your processes. But the problem with statistics is that it's statistics.
I was told there'd be no math in this job.
It's math.
I don't know who told me that.
It's hard. Or it seems to be hard. So people have come to rely, maybe over-rely, on software to do their statistics for them. And that has perhaps led to some problems and misconceptions in the use of those statistics. Our next guest understands all about that. He is Director of Development for PQ Systems, a developer of SPC software, statistical process control software, and other products. Steve Daum, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Okay, well, in your article, towards the end of it, you do allude to the fact that people often expect to blindly plug data into SPC software and expect it to magically give them answers without truly understanding what they're doing. So how important is a mathematical or at least a conceptual understanding of SPC, even when using software?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think deep math is all that critical to the use of SPC software, but understanding the concepts is important. Dr. Don Wheeler said something years ago that has really stuck with me, and that is that SPC is a way of thinking with some tools attached. And that really stuck with me because if you focus too much on the tools, for example, the math or the software, and not enough on the way of thinking, you're not going to get the full benefit from it. So even though math is not critically important, it is important that the quality improvement workers understand things like variation, the difference between common and special cause variation, what it means to have a stable process, and something about capability, what it means to produce a product that meets your customer requirements. So these concepts can be understood, without doing any math, but it does require some training and some practice. And if you do that training and have your employees practice that often, they'll pick up on the concepts, even though they may not be able to by hand calculate the CPK.
Steve, in your experience, what's the biggest or maybe the most prevalent error you see people make when they're using statistical software?
Well, there are many. I think one of the most common is to focus on capability before you've conquered stability. So your supplier, your customer for your product, they will communicate with you about their specifications. And so your temptation is to focus on capability and capability analysis. But if you haven't studied the process yet and understood that it's stable and predictable, then it's kind of premature to do capability. So I think that's one of the most common mistakes that we run into.
You mentioned in your article, and we get this question sent to us actually quite frequently, how much data is enough data to start doing analysis? And we must get that question a couple times a month.
It's a great question. It's also a common question that we run into. I wish there was a single answer I could give you on this, but it really depends on where you are in the process of understanding some metric that you're paying attention to. If you're just starting and you're early and you've never really studied this metric, it doesn't take much data to start to get benefit by looking at the data in chart form. Almost immediately, even a line chart, you can get an idea of where the process is centered, how much variation there is. So, there's no hard and fast rule. If you have 3 or more data points, it's going to be easier to understand those visually in a chart than it will be to see a column of numbers on a piece of paper. Now, on the other hand, if you've been studying a metric for a long time and you're very familiar with how stable it is, where it's centered, what the variation is around the center, in that case, then you probably want to have enough data when you go to do something like compute control limits so that the data represents what your process is doing. So if your process runs all day, but you use data from just 1 minute of production, then those limits aren't going to reflect, your process over the course of a day. So, it really varies. The key point I'd like to make, though, is that if you have even a small amount of data, you can benefit from looking at that visually in chart form.
Well, you mentioned charts. I guess, and we hear this a lot, software makes it so easy to spit out probably every conceivable SPC chart there is, including some that I've never even heard of. And I think we've all walked into a production facility at some time and seen a wall full of charts. But realistically, what are the most useful charts that need to be displayed? Maybe a better way to put that is the most useful charts that might provide good information for the people who are actually working on a process.
Yeah, that's another great question. And we visit a lot of plants in the course of a year, and we've seen the walls that you're talking about that have the charts on them. And first of all, I'd like to say that, establishing a habit of looking at data in chart form and establishing the way of thinking behind SPC, these are things that need to be trained and reinforced into the workforce. But the job doesn't end once you've wallpapered the lunchroom with your charts. There's more to it than that. One of my coworkers here mentioned that the best chart is the one that you can look at and say, is there something I can do? Can I respond to this chart if there's a signal from it? If the answer is no, then a good question might be, do I really need to print this chart out and put it on the lunchroom wall every Monday? But in terms of the types of charts, I always like for people to start simple. So if you're just looking at a metric for the first time, a run chart, it's very, anyone in elementary school can make a run chart of 5 or 6 data points, and you can immediately get some context and a visual look at what's happening. So I start with run charts, and then if you want to learn more about the process, you might go to an individuals chart, which is a control chart. So you've got control limits. You can do some pattern recognition, look for out of control points on the chart. Okay, one problem with that is that if you start with an individuals chart, you might focus only on where the process is centered and not how much it varies around the mean. And so after that, you might make it a two-pane chart where you're looking at both an individuals and a range chart, so that you get a sense of both of those sources of variation, where it's centered and how much spread there is. So, the bottom line is think with charts, start simple, and do more as you need it. If you're looking at hundreds of charts on a wall, ask yourself the question, can I do anything about any of this? And if the answer is no, another question might be, do we really need to be doing these charts? Those are great questions, though.
Okay. Well, we're going to have a lot more. Steve Daum is going to be presenting a webinar along with Quality Digest, myself, next week, called The 5 Common Mistakes Applying SPC and How to Avoid Them. So all of what we talked about just now and a lot more. Next Thursday, December 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. So if you're confused about statistics, or you think you need to start doing statistics and you want to know how to get started and what to avoid, this is the webinar for you. So be sure to join us there next Thursday. Steve, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, see you next week.
You too. We'll see you Thursday, Steve. Yeah, good stuff there. Yeah, and not just for people that don't know statistics. I think people that are doing SPC for a while are going to
might learn something that maybe they're doing something wrong.
Yeah, Steve, as you can see in that little clip, Steve really has a high level of expertise in this area. So check it out. Check out your email. We'll be sending you email reminders about that. You can register through that, or you can register through Steve's article, which is, again, right below the player page right down there. All right.